Good morning. My name is Sergeant Adair, and today we'll be discussing the levels of leadership. Today I'll be covering the topic of leadership and the various levels that this entails. After discussing each level thoroughly, I will do a quick check on learning to ensure that everyone has a sound understanding of what leadership is and each level that we discussed. Then I will conclude today's presentation by summarizing the levels of leadership and answering any questions that are still pending. So as I said before, we will be discussing the 3 levels of leadership and how each level of leadership influence that leadership has on its subordinates. So can anybody tell me what leadership is or define it in their own words?
So I feel like leadership is giving soldiers the purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish a common task or goal.
That's correct. The AEP definition is leadership is being able to influence people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation while operating to accomplish the mission and improving the organization.
So what ADP could I find this in?
You can find this in ADP 6-22, section 1-74. So the 3 levels of leadership. Does anybody happen to have an idea of what the 3 levels of leadership are?
So if I were to put it in my own words, I would say it would have to do with the different levels of ranks. So like junior enlisted, non-commissioned officer, and then officers.
Okay. So direct leadership is being able to have a face-to-face or first-line leadership that generally occurs within organizations where subordinates see their leaders all the time, such as teams, squads, sections, platoons, departments, companies, batteries, and troops. Then we also have organizational leaders. An organizational leader exercises leadership through subordinate leaders who are responsible for leading the various organizations that make up the larger organization. Organizational leaders establish a climate that supports their subordinate leaders. So what does this mean to you?
So with direct leadership, I'm guessing that would be like my first line supervisor.
Correct.
They counsel me on performance. And then organizational leadership, I feel like that would be more first sergeant commander oriented.
That's correct. And then we have strategic leadership. Strategic leadership guides and integrates multiple organizational level units that perform a wide range of functions. It influences several of thousands of people. These leaders allocate resources, communicate strategic visions, and prepare their commands and the Army itself for future missions. So what does this mean to you?
So this would have to be like higher up so we don't see that kind of create the plans.
Right. So such as like an example would be the Command Sergeant Major of the Army. He creates visions that are expected for the organizational leaders to envision out and set the standard for the Army. So now that we discussed the direct leadership, we're going to go into the roles that direct leadership plays to their subordinates. So 1, direct leadership covers day-to-day operations. They're able to develop others through coaching, counseling, and mentoring. Direct leaders are generally more confident in their subordinates' work, being that they work in such close proximity of their soldiers. For example, company commanders and NCOs are able to directly influence their soldiers through training and or missions. Direct leadership understands that the tasks given and they are able to perform 2 levels up and, if needed, 1 level down. Direct leadership influences the growth of their soldiers, allowing them to accomplish their personal, academic, and professional goals. So now that we know what the roles of the direct leadership are, we're going to now go into the roles of organizational leadership. Organizational leaders are able to motivate their soldiers. Organizational leaders extend their influences through their subordinates who are responsible for leading organizations. They do not need daily guidance from their higher echelons in order for a task or mission to be accomplished. Organizational leaders are executing visions that are given by higher command. So what does this mean to you right here? Organizational leaders are executed visions given by higher command.
So like if an Alarac or MILPER message comes down from the Secretary of Defense or Big Army, then it's up to the commanders to disseminate the information as well as like, hey, read this.
Right,
Make sure
exactly.
You know the rules.
So this is more of where you see the strategic leader executing his vision to the organizational leader. Organizational leaders help enforce standards that were created, which goes back to the strategic leader. The strategic leader creates these standards, and the organizational leader's job is to enforce it. And organizational leaders ensure that commanders' intent is met. We'll now go into discussing what the strategic leadership is. The majority of officers and high-ranking enlisting soldiers who are responsible to lead change at the strategic level. Strategic leaders envision what the big picture is. They have to think outside of the box. They have to understand that the decisions that they are making, and it must be in the best interest of their troops. Strategic leaders must accommodate their visions to future missions and to ensure that they are successful. These types of leaders are there to implement change at the highest level. Strategic leaders need to be able to inspire their subordinates. So now that you know what the 3 levels of leadership is, how may you tie that into what you see in your unit every day?
So I'm going to say, like, me and all the people in my office were kind of direct leadership with anybody that's like subordinate to us. We're like, hey, we got to do this today, we need to do this, and then so on and so forth. Whereas the organizational leadership would be more of a first sergeant, senior NCO, commander role, where they're like, hey, we got to get this done, tell this company or this platoon to go do X, Y, and Z. And then strategic leadership, that would be more like generals and garrison commanders, like how we have a general order here. You gotta can only go a certain amount of miles. It's because he's made that decision in the best interest of his garrison and troops.
Correct. So in conclusion, today we discussed what the 3 levels of leadership are. You are now able to identify the differences between each level of leadership. You are now also aware of the roles each level of leadership has, and you are also now aware of how each level of leadership influences their soldiers. Are there any questions or concerns?
So say like if somebody is considered a direct leader, can they also be in the role of an organizational leader at the same time?
So yes, let's say you have a senior NCO and you happen to have a first sergeant that's away on leave. That senior NCO can also be an acting first sergeant. However, even though they are also in the roles of an organizational leadership, that NCO may also be your direct leader, who you still are able to do face-to-face, day-to-day operations with them.
So who can be a leader?
So anybody can be a leader as long as they're assigned that role of responsibility. They have to be able to want to lead and want to inspire and want to influence their soldiers to be better and do better.
Do you think these classifications of leadership levels, do you think they help with day-to-day operations in the military?
So I would say that the levels of leadership help create a standard for the Army. These levels of leadership help for soldiers to understand that it works as a chain of command. Every leader has to respond to somebody, and every leader has a higher echelons that they go off of. It's how they lead and how they determine, how the Army will function.
Okay, no more questions.
All right, that will conclude today's presentation on the levels of leadership.